Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, wishing you a happy Friday. I hope you've had a great week. Hope you have something enjoyable planned for the weekend, although I hope those plans involve being and staying safe because, you know, those numbers are going back up. So we have to take better precautions, and that's my plan. You know, get stuff done around the house, but stay home and keep the hubby company and just hopefully stay safe and healthy. And that's what I wish for you as well. It is Friday, and I don't always have Friday interviews, but I do this week. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I am speaking with Pat McKee today about his new legal thriller, Ariel's Island. It is a legal thriller. And the legal aspects, of course, are very essential to the story and the plot and the character development. But it also, of course, contains aspects of intrigue and mystery and suspense, because hence the thriller portion of that title, legal thriller. There's also some science fiction-like aspects in that it is set in contemporary times, and the science is all pretty much what we have that's possible now, but maybe not to the extent that it's described in the book. So it's not like full-blown science fiction, but there are a few little aspects of that, and Pat addresses that in the interview, that he does not like to call this science fiction because all of the technology is currently available in various ways. So part legal, part thriller, part not quite science fiction, but also inspired by Shakespeare. And Pat's going to talk about that, what he likes about Shakespeare and why he chose The Tempest as part of his inspiration for this story. So the story. When the Milano Corporation's lead counselor plummets to his death, young and hungry Atlanta litigator Paul McDaniel dives into the murky waters of the patent dispute between brothers Placido and Antonio Milano and their mysterious challenger, Sycorax Ltd. Placido's elusive assistant, Ariel, helps Paul glide through the turbulent currents of the case, and his prospects couldn't seem any brighter until a weekend spent at an exclusive coastal island resort with the Milanos reveals a hidden adversary and sends Paul scrambling to save Placido's daughter Melissa, prove himself innocent of bribery and murder, and preserve the career he sacrificed his entire life to build. So that is the description of Ariel's Island. You get all of those aspects in there. You know, you've got danger and, the murky waters of a patent dispute. You know, that's definitely the legal part. I do not claim to understand patent law in any way, shape, or form, but I didn't feel like I was lost reading the book and navigating my way through the legal jargon in it. This is a complicated story in that there's lots of different connections, different interweavings, if you will, different layers. I mean, you've got the legal aspect, the legal battle, but then as you see from the description, then there's the threat, there's family intrigue, there's corporate intrigue, there's all of these different layers that you're trying to figure out, okay, who's on whose side, and where does Paul fit into this, and what is Ariel's role in all of this. And you may or may not see what's coming at the end when it actually comes. But I'm, not, of course, going to tell you about the end. So very intriguing, very complex and nuanced and layered and very interesting. Now, I as you know, I don't always lean towards thrillers in my... I have to stop saying that because I read a ton of thrillers anymore, right? I didn't used to lean toward thrillers. And now I would say that legal thrillers have never also really been my cup of tea. I've read some John Grisham, but never really fully got into that. But I may have to change my mind now that I've read Ariel's Island, because I did enjoy it. And like I said, I didn't feel bogged down in the legal parts of it, and the thriller part of it, not too horribly creepy or scary or gory. Those are my key points for liking a thriller, is that it can't give me nightmares or have too high of a body count or gore. Yeah, okay, let's let Pat talk about his own book now. Again, the book is called Ariel's Island. The author is Pat McKee. Hi, Pat. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. We're going to be talking about your new book called Ariel's Island. But before we get to the book, if you could share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be awesome.
Certainly. And again, thank you a lot. I'm a lawyer. I live in a small town, Noonan, Georgia, which is south of Atlanta. My wife, Donna, and I, we have 2 children, Jessica and Patrick. Our daughter, Jessica, and her husband, Alden, have 1 child, our first grandchild, Slyn. I've been practicing law in Georgia for over 40 years, and I primarily represent educational institutions, schools, colleges, accreditors, and foundations. I was born in Miami, Florida. My parents died when I was young, and I grew up in an orphanage. It's my experience that graduating from an orphanage and putting myself through college and law school and becoming a successful attorney that initially encouraged me to write my story in the form of a memoir. But eventually the memoir grew into a legal thriller, and Ariel's Island is the result.
Yeah, I saw when I read the biography on the book that you'd grown up in an orphanage, which is not something that you hear of so often anymore. So
right.
That's kind of fascinating.
Well, it's an interesting background. Like you say, you don't hear about that much anymore, and I think not to get off on a social issue, but I think that the preferred way of dealing with children who have lost their parents now is to put them in foster homes. And so that's a whole different way of dealing with children. And so I think the institutional aspect has had a lot of impact on me, and I think it is reflected in my writing and my desire really to again, to tell my story.
Yeah, I would imagine. So let's talk about the book. Again, it's called Ariel's Island. Can you give an overview of the story?
Sure, absolutely. So to start, Ariel's Island is a legal thriller. It's about a young lawyer. His name is Paul McDaniel. And Paul is framed for the murder of a judge. What he does is he enlists the help of his assistant, which is an artificial intelligence program named Ariel. And he asked Ariel to help him clear his name and rescue a beautiful heiress who is also implicated in the murder. And all of this is kind of set in the context of a legal contest between 2 brothers, Anthony and Placido, who have inherited Milano Corporation and their battle for dominance over that corporation. Ariel starts as Paul's capable assistant. Then she becomes his powerful protector, and as he tries to avoid prosecution, but she morphs into a jealous mistress and ultimately into a murderous monster at the close of the book. So the book has elements of technological thriller as well.
And I apologize for putting this into people's heads, but when I was thinking about Ariel and how she evolves through the book, I couldn't help but think of that one episode of The Simpsons where they get a smart house that's voiced by Pierce Brosnan, and Pierce Brosnan falls in love with Marge and tries to kill Homer.
That's pretty good. Now, I haven't seen that episode of The Simpsons, so I'm going to have to pull that up.
Yeah, I have no idea what season it is. I didn't regularly watch The Simpsons. I just happened to catch that one episode. But
yes, well, it does sound fascinating, and that is a significant issue, is how we are dealing with artificial intelligence. So I try to treat aspects of that in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the main character of Paul. What about him do you think will resonate with readers?
Sure. One of the things that I think, so it's as you note from having read the book, Paul is obviously an autobiographical character. He has some aspects of my background. He grew up in an orphanage as well. And one of the I think major areas where readers will find him sympathetic is that he's vulnerable. He's not socially adept, having grown up in an orphanage, and he is placed in a highly successful area because of his hard work, and he's exposed to very wealthy people, and in particular, a beautiful heiress named Melissa. And she rather shamelessly manipulates him. He falls very much in love with her. And ultimately, the story is about Paul and Melissa and what happens to them once Paul is lifted from the suspicion of the murder of the judge. So that's one of the things that I think is most sympathetic about Paul is he's not perfect. He is vulnerable, and so many people that have read the book have told me that they're by the end of the book they're rooting for Paul, rooting for him and Melissa. I'm not going to give the ending away, but it becomes of course, the central issue of the book.
Right. And there are a lot of different layers of the book. So, I mean, it's a legal thriller, but then there's power struggles, and there's all of the different layers of Paul's relationship with not only Melissa but Ariel, and how all those things evolve. Are you a plotter or a pantser? So when you write, do you write by the seat of your pants, or do you plot? Did you kind of outline all of those details to keep track of them?
Goodness gracious. I'm glad you asked that question. I guess I'm a what you would call a pantser. I write the characters, and in this case, of course, Ariel is a character, even though she's an artificial intelligence program. But I write the characters and let them play themselves out. And one of the more interesting things about this book is that the last editor that reviewed it for me made a very important observation, and that is that the book is about Ariel. And once I admitted to myself that the book is about Ariel, then I rewrote both the beginning and the end of the book, basically to put her in the center focus. So it was not until the very end of the book that I knew how it was going to end myself.
Wow! So it was even a surprise to the author. That's you're not the first one.
It was a surprise to me how that book ended.
Nice.
And it becomes a surprise, I think, to a lot of readers too. I think you would admit the ending was pretty much a surprise.
Yeah, I don't want to give anything away, but yes.
That laugh just seems like the perfect place to take a break, don't you think? So now that you've got a better understanding of the storyline and the book itself, we will go ahead and take that first break. When we come back, we'll be talking about Pat's initial inspiration for the book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Pat McKee about his new legal thriller, Ariel's Island. Before the break, he was giving an overview of that book. And now let's go ahead and talk about some of his inspirations for the story.
What was your initial inspiration for the story?
So I am, I guess, like many writers, I began as an English major in college, and one of my my greatest interests in college and still now is Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare, and my favorite play of Shakespeare is The Tempest. And many of your listeners will no doubt recognize the name Ariel from The Tempest. Ariel is a spirit in The Tempest, and she does the bidding of the magician, Prospero, throughout the play. But at the end of the play, Prospero frees Ariel as a reward for her doing so many tasks for him. She is the one that, as you know, whips up the tempest to shipwreck the antagonist in the play. And so he, at the end, Prospero frees Ariel, and a lot of Shakespeare scholars think that this is a metaphor. The Tempest was likely to be Shakespeare's last play, and that some scholars think that freeing Ariel, the spirit, is metaphor for his freeing his creativity upon his retirement. And so I have always been fascinated by that act, the freeing of Ariel at the end of The Tempest, because there is nothing in the play to tell us what happened. And I've always been extremely curious as to what would happen if an all-powerful spirit is loosed upon the world without any moral compass. And the book, Ariel's Island, seeks to consider that issue and to look at it and to answer the question, can artificial intelligence learn morality?
Yeah, interesting. I actually had another interview this weekend with an author that talks a little bit about it's set a little bit in the future and technology and artificial intelligence and everything. And so I'm fascinated that I have two books that are exploring similar-ish themes, but that slippery slope of technology, of how you're using it for good reasons, but then when does it turn into using technology for not so great reasons, and how much control can we give the technology?
Right. Well, one of the things, and I very much hesitate to suggest that my book is even slightly science fiction. I don't believe it's science fiction. I believe what I explore in the book is here now. And I read an editorial in the New York Times a couple months ago by the head of computer science at Berkeley, and his article was treating, or his editorial was treating this issue of morality and artificial intelligence. And he posed this question. He says, what if we put artificial intelligence, our most powerful computers, on solving one of the biggest problems in the world today, and that's global warming? Let us put a supercomputer on that, and what happens if what the supercomputer does is figures out, well, the best way to do away with global warming is to do away with humans. And if a supercomputer, which, by the way, does have control of most of the power grids in the world, decides to do away with humans, we probably wouldn't stand a chance. So that is a very real question. How does an artificial intelligence program govern itself in a moral sense? And then one of the other questions is, okay, if we decide to program an artificial intelligence program with some form of morality, whose morality is it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting what's being done with artificial intelligence now. I mean, I know on a smaller scale, there was an experiment a couple of years ago where they had an artificial intelligence interact with people on Twitter, and they had to shut it down within just a couple of days because she became, well, racist and like just all of these horrible things that she picked up from probably internet trolls.
Right,
so it's crazy.
Right. So if you program a artificial intelligence program to learn morality from human beings, we're sunk.
Yeah, I would agree.
In other words, human beings don't act generally in a very moral way. And the experiment that you just talked about, I had heard about that as well. The program picked up all of the bad habits of human beings and started reflecting those in her Twitter feed.
Yeah, which is really quite a sad commentary, actually, on
absolutely
how we interact. So what kinds of research did you do for the book?
Well, the primary influence of the book is the play The Tempest. So fortunately, since I really love Shakespeare, I immersed myself into the play. I read it many times. I saw as many different kinds of performances as I could, and started in that, trying to immerse myself in the plot of the play. And so I was able to extract a number of things and characters. There's a direct relationship between the magician in the play, Prospero, and one of the characters, Placido, in the novel. And it goes on and on. There are a number of direct relationships between characters and in the play and in the novel. But the general area that the novel comes from, the genre, legal thriller, I am kind of just a person who reads lots of legal thrillers, and so I didn't have to do a lot of research in that regard, nor did I have to do a lot of research on the courtroom settings and the various legal ins and outs, because I have practiced 40 years and I do litigate on a regular basis. So that was pretty easy for me. The thing that proved more difficult, of course, is the concept of artificial intelligence. And what I didn't want to do is to try to anticipate all of the developments in artificial intelligence and that sort of thing, because if I did, I would either be wrong or in 6 months, I would be obsolete. So I tried to write the parts about artificial intelligence in a very general way and not trying to turn it into some kind of prediction of what artificial intelligence would be like in the next decade.
Yeah, which I would imagine could be. Well, did you find that easier or more difficult to not try to go there to predict what it may turn into?
I found it actually more difficult, and the reason is that it would be very easy to, write the plot of a book with concrete examples of, what this particular artificial intelligence program is capable of doing and that sort of thing. It's harder to make a believable plot if you keep those details a bit amorphous. And I think you're having read the book, you'll agree that Ariel is very much like a human character, and there's not a whole lot of, computer wizardry that we talk about. And frankly, I couldn't talk about. I don't know that much about computers.
I would say I don't know that much about computers either. I mean, certainly not to the technological level of knowing how AI works, although I do find myself frequently trying to help my parents, who are in Montana while I'm in California, do troubleshooting on their computer, which is interesting since I am not there. I spent 2 hours on the phone with my dad yesterday trying to fix an issue, but I will say that we did fix it. So, hey, go us. At any rate, enough about my IT help of my parents, for my parents, excuse me. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about the character of Ariel. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, we were talking about some of the research that Pat put into the novel and talking about the artificial intelligence of the character of Ariel. And yes, she is actually a character, even though she's not human. She is artificial intelligence. So let's go ahead and get back to that interview with Pat.
But making her a character, albeit an artificially intelligent character, I think furthers the plot and makes it more relational.
I think so too, and so that was the challenge for me, is to not kind of get drawn into the science fiction side of it and start spouting off about all that these computers are going to be able to do, but to deal with it in a more I think Ariel is dealt with as almost as a human character in the book.
Mm-hmm. What are you working on now? And related, will Paul be appearing in other books?
So, not giving away the end of the book, we would both agree, wouldn't we, that there is the opportunity at the end of the book for a sequel. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So I am literally, just before you and I got on the phone together, I'm writing the next book. And when my friends ask me what I'm doing, I tell them I'm trying to figure out how Paul gets out of what he's into at the end of the book. So that there is going to be another book about Paul. There'll be and Ariel will play a major role in that, and I am working on that right now. So I hope that the momentum that we get from Ariel's Island will build, and we'll be able to satisfy readers with yet another interesting book about Paul McDaniel and Ariel.
And are Paul and Ariel being cooperative in helping you to get Paul out of the current predicament he finds himself in?
Right now, they're very cooperative. They're helping me. But unless if you're a plotter, like you say, I guess you would sit down and you would plot out the whole, story, and how the book ends before you sit down to write. I have no clue right now how we're going to resolve all of these various issues that were raised in Ariel's Island. But I'm working.
Wow. You were I find that fascinating. You are a lawyer, so you have. I know you've written in various capacities throughout your career, but was writing fiction something that you kind of always wanted to do? I know you were an English major, so was that something you always wanted to do, or something that you decided to do later in life?
Well, it's something that I always wanted to do. I've always wanted to write fiction, but one of the things that always seemed to I don't know, be an impediment to that is I felt when I was a lot younger that I didn't have enough experience in life to be able to write something that people would be interested in reading. It was only, later in my life that I felt, I've got a story to tell. I can tell it. I have interesting insights in various things. I think people would be interested in reading about it. And so I didn't have the courage, if you will, to write fiction until I was older. I've written a number of books that are nonfiction on legal topics, and I now find, and I can tell you without hesitation, that writing fiction is so much more fun.
I would imagine, because you can go in all sorts of different directions, where I would imagine that you have to stick to guidelines writing for the legal world.
In the legal world, you have to stick with such within such constraints, and writing fiction is just so liberating to me. It's fun. It really is fun. You hear a lot of people who talk about writing, and it's, oh my goodness, I'm stuck in this room and I'm staring at this piece of paper, and oh my goodness, how am I going to ever do anything? I look at it, this is Saturday, this is my day off supposedly, and I'm in the office writing. It's fun to me.
Let's go ahead and take one more break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Pat's advice for aspiring authors. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Pat was speaking about how he came to write fiction and to write this first novel. And so let's go ahead and get back to the interview with Pat McKee. We're talking about his new book, Ariel's Island.
Nice. From your perspective, then, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Well, I can tell aspiring authors that if my story can be useful to them, that the best lesson I can give is don't give up. It took me 10 years to write Ariel's Island. And that really isn't from, the beginning of my desire to write, but that's actually the beginning of a book that looked a lot like Ariel's Island, and it took 10 years to write. One of the things that I did to help myself understand the craft of writing is to enroll in a creative writing course at Kennesaw University, which is a university that's close by here. And I benefited greatly from the interaction with my classmates and my professors. Just, we have this idea that we can sit down, anybody can sit down and write. Well, yeah, I guess you can, but it does take a bit of knowledge of the techniques and the craft of writing before you can actually, I believe, before you can sit down and write something meaningful. And it really helps to have professors and other students to, as you probably know, in a workshop setting, you can trade ideas and thoughts, and your classmates' ideas help hone your work. And I can say the kernel of Ariel's Island came from that experience in a creative writing class.
Your persistence is admirable. Did you ever consider just scrapping it and trying something new, or were you committed to this particular book?
That really is interesting. The beginning, if you looked at the first draft of the book that ultimately became Ariel's Island, it would be unrecognizable. So while I stuck with the same book, if you will, I rewrote that thing so many times that you might as well say I've written a half a dozen or a dozen other books in getting to the book that ultimately became Ariel's Island. But I never looked at it as scrapping one and starting over. I just kept editing, asking for input. I had some wonderful editors along the way who helped me, some teachers who helped me, and I've talked to some other authors who've had similar experiences that, you just keep writing and rewriting until ultimately you get to something that you think that people might want to read.
Yeah, and thank you for that. You mentioned earlier that you are also a fan of reading legal thrillers. Is that your main genre, or do you have other authors and genres that you go to when you read for yourself?
Oh, I read everything. I love bouncing back and forth between, history, nonfiction, fiction. But when I'm entertaining myself, I love, if there's some legal thrillers out there or other thrillers. Greg Iles is one of my favorites. John Gresham, of course, is both a favorite and an inspiration. I just finished Christopher Moore's most recent book, Shakespeare for Squirrels. I don't know if you read much of Christopher Moore. He's very, very funny.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I had not heard of Shakespeare for Squirrels. I will have to check that out.
Yeah, it's his most recent, just came out, and
Okay.
quite funny. And yeah, I just finished that last night, literally, and I'm reading, read a bounce back between literature, fiction, and history and biography. I'm working on a biography of Montaigne, but it's like 1,000 pages. So I kind of take it in small doses.
Sure. Yeah, you kind of have to just to work your way through it. Excuse me. You're a Shakespeare fan. Is The Tempest your favorite, or do you have other favorite Shakespeare plays?
Well, it's hard to say, pick one of 36 or whatever plays that he has that is your absolute favorite. I love The Tempest, but I also love Midsummer Night's Dream. I think that's wonderful. And I'm very much kind of a incurable romantic, and I do love Romeo and Juliet. I think that's a wonderful play. I'm not much into his history plays. Those don't get it for me too much, but I do love all of his tragedies, Lear and Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet. But the comedies, to me, Midsummer Night's Dream is my favorite.
Mine too. And I've had conversations with people in the past where I think A Midsummer Night's Dream and Much Ado About Nothing are hilarious. And people look at me like I'm crazy because they just can't get past the language. So they can't, they can't see the humor because they can't get past the way it's written.
Well, it's all, his comedies are obviously brilliant. And just by the way, if you like Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare for Squirrels is Christopher Moore's take on Midsummer Night's
Dream. Okay. Speaking of Christopher Moore, have you read? It's an older one, but it's The Gospel According to Biff.
No, I need to read that. I really want to read it, but he's written. I didn't realize how many he's written.
Yeah, a lot, yeah.
But I'm going to pick that one up as soon as I can. But the most, can't remember off the top of my head, but noir is one of my favorites of his. But I can't remember the last one about Shakespeare that he wrote. The title escapes me, but they're all very funny.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it was about it was the Merchant of Venice. Was the last one.
Okay. Yeah, he definitely has different kind of subsets. Like he has the vampire, or the more towards the horror side more, and then there's right. Shakespeare, and then he's kind of his brain must be a very interesting place.
Yeah, I would love. You ought to get him on your show.
Well, from your lips to somebody's ear.
I hope you do. Please call me when you get him on. I want to listen.
I will. Thanks. Pat, I know that you have a website, so if you can tell people your website and where they might be able to find and interact with you on social media.
Yes. Thank you so much for letting me do that. So my website is www.patmckee, MCKEE, author.com, and my Facebook site is Pat McKee Author, same handle basically, and that's where to find me. And my book is available on Amazon. Ariel's Island is available on Amazon, as well as the Book Factory store, which is also it's my publisher's site.
All right, thank you. We've talked about a lot of different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention now in terms of your writing or just anything that we haven't covered?
I just want to thank you for doing this, because right now it's a very hard time for authors to get the word out about their books. I've had, in the last 6 months, all of my face-to-face appearances canceled. And so it's a dreadfully difficult time to promote one's book, and I appreciate your doing this. It's about the only outlet now for authors to be able to talk about their works. All of the live events have been pretty much shut down. So I'm hoping soon that book launches and libraries and bookstores will all be opened again, but it hasn't happened yet. So I sincerely appreciate you doing this. It's one of the best ways for us to get the word out about our work, and thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And considering that we are on opposite sides of the country, I'd say we are very appropriately socially distanced right now.
Right. No chance. I'm not right. Wearing a mask right now.
I am not either, and I hope it's not traveling through the phone to you.
Yeah.
So,
I think we're safe.
I think so. Thank you again for taking the time. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Once again, thank you so much to Pat McKee for joining me to talk about his new book, Ariel's Island. If you're a fan of legal thrillers, or if you're a fan of thrillers in general, you should definitely check it out. If you're a fan of books that talk about AI and how AI can go wonky sometimes, then you should check this out. If you are a fan of Shakespeare, then you should check this out. See, it's a book that covers a variety of different likes and genres, which is very cool. So thank you to Pat, and thank you as always to you, my listeners. I so very much appreciate you. If you are a fan of this podcast, this is the point where I ask you to please give us a nice review, either 5-star or written. It's extremely appreciated, and it helps us to get the podcast out to more book lovers like yourselves. Also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're GSMC Book Review, all those places. I would love to hear from you, so hit me up on social media, leave your comments, leave your questions, leave your thoughts about the interviews and the books. If you've read them, I would love to hear your thoughts on the books, etc. So hope you have a wonderful but safe weekend planned. And I hope you will join me again on Tuesday when I will be speaking with author MJ Preston about his Highwayman series. It is, it's about a serial killer, and we'll talk more about what else it's about when I speak with MJ, and you can listen to that interview on Tuesday. So thank you again. Have a wonderful, safe weekend, and I hope that that weekend involves plenty of time to get yourselves lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.